we're going to share some things today about pyramids, Egypt, things like that. I have a couple things I want to share first before we get to hear from Philos. Because thank you for everybody's questions. There was actually almost 30. I think there was like 30 questions. So because there were so many questions, I want to make sure it could all get covered. So I told Philos I would answer the ones that I could answer on MeWe, and then he could answer the rest. So that's what we did, and hopefully you've got some background there. Before we talk to Philos, we're going to read a little bit out of the oracles, which will also give the background for that as well. And before I get into that, I want to share one other thing with you. All right, so this actually relates to Philos's talk, which is why we're going to show this a little bit. And this bowl that this gentleman is holding, is a bowl that's used for sound therapy, but this particular bowl, this size, and also this is made by hand, which he'll explain a little bit in the video. This is something that's very powerful to use for Celestine vibronics. And I'm going to show it to you because it also relates to what Philos is going to be talking about with the pyramids, which you wouldn't think they connect, but they actually do. So I'm going to just start this video, and you can see everything he's doing is a actual technique of Celestine vibronics, very powerful. So I'll stop it and talk a little bit, but I'm going to let him go ahead and start here.
So this is we call healing bowl. We use for meditation, yoga, and therapy. So this is the handmade with 7 different metal mix, and those are the machine made. We can see everywhere in markets. So we call tourist quality. So handmade is just we tap it. You can feel very good resonance, like
Yes.
And this is very old traditional therapy in Nepal. It started in 11th century BC, and after this, in middle, this has been collapsed, and again is returned to use therapy. So therapy means when we have migraine, depression, insomnia, back pain, stress, we can use these bowls.
Okay.
So when we have migraine, depression, insomnia, then we put bowl on the head like this. And after we tap it, all vibration goes inside our body because we have 70% water inside our bodies. Then we feel like this. You can see here what.
Okay, now this is the part I want you to watch because this is the part that relates to the Egyptian pyramids. So you have this, he's got a bowl and he's got water in the bowl, and watch what happens to the water when he starts using it to make the bowl vibrate.
Yes, our body. Let's imagine.
So when we turn, you can see the vibration. So this is not magic, this is physics, this is resonance. And this everybody can do, not only Nepali hand, all hand can do this.
I can try?
Yeah, press
Wow.
more press.
Wow.
To make bowl, it takes 2 days, and we have to hammer millions of times. So we use this. So this is the first step to make bowl, and this is handmade, and this we put inside 1200 degree in fire. Then after we hammer and hammer, so we have to hammer millions of times to make one bowls.
Make the big one like that.
Yeah, that's right. So we do like this. You can sit down here.
Okay. Now your turn.
Okay.
So put your hand on your knee, straight your spine, close eyes. Okay, close eyes. So if we have back pain, then we put on back like this. Okay, now join your knee together. So this is the natural therapy. We have 7 different chakras in our bodies.
Okay.
So when one chakra is not is blocked, we get sick. So we are doing opening our chakras. Okay, close eyes. Okay. Now she is around another world.
It's true. It's like the feeling of after you get a massage.
So machine mades are very heavy. Make flat your hand, both hand. And handmade is light. You can see the difference in. So handmade give you very good resonance, and machine made is just for a few seconds and it go away.
This one is longer.
Yeah, this is longer. And every machine made we see here small point. You can see here. So this is the we made by turn. When you see here, so here is zigzag, because handmade we cannot make same smoothly like this. So machine made is more smooth and like this. So every bowl we use 2 sticks. One stick is that red one for therapy, and this one is for sound and water vibration and meditation. The sound is like a and you can feel the vibration in near. You can put hand here.
Your hand close to, not close.
Yeah. When you touch, you feel it's like a electric spark. For back pain is not possible. We need someone. So head, we just put it on head like this, and one hand here, and after we tap it on side. Don't close eyes, otherwise this go to nose also sometimes. Be careful. Like this. Just 5 minute morning, 5 minute evening.
The channel, and I was just like, because we are going to Serbia this weekend, and I just say, oh, start looking where we can buy such thing. Do we need to go to Budapest again? Where do we need to go to buy like such a singing bowl handmade? They are not easy to find here in the Balkans because we don't have such culture to using alternative medicine.
Yeah,
So
well,
we need to go abroad.
they're hard to find anywhere, and they're expensive. But they're the walls are much thicker than the walls of the machine-made ones, and the resonant sound lasts literally 4, 5, 6 times longer than in the other ones. And they're also, with the other ones, they tend to, if you put them on something, it turns it off. The sound stops. But on these, you can set them on yourself or whatever, and the sound keeps going. It doesn't stop, which is really cool.
And you can find them very easily on their internet. There's some good companies, and they import them to this country from
Well, they start in Nepal.
Nepal, which is closer to you than it is to us. So that's where you'd want to check, is how to get them from Nepal, because you can get them right directly from person that.
Yeah, I had another video I was going to show, but we're running out of time for that, so I'm not going to show it. But actually show how they make it, And it's just so cool. It's so primitive. So you got basically 4 guys. One guy's the fire guy, and the 3 guys are the hammer guys. And they start with that little metal disc, like the guy was showing in the one video we watched, and heats that up. And the guy he's the fire guy. He sits there, and he's got a little hand crank fan that he uses to make the fire get stronger, and heats it up. And then he brings it out. And the other 3 guys have these handmade mallets. They're just on sticks with a big head that's also a big piece of wood. And there's part of it that's bigger on one end and shorter on the other. And so as soon as he brings it out, the 3 guys are kind of sitting in a semicircle. They all start boom, 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 to hammer it into the shape. And it's quite an interesting.
Like I said,
maybe next
millions of times. That's a lot of hits on the.
And I was going to show you one other thing too. That when we were earlier, we were talking about Samara was talking to Sister Dansha about doing lapidary work now. So one of the cool things, and you probably may not be able to do it in Macedonia, but certainly Reggie could do it in Hakim in New York if you're interested. There's so many really cool things that you can find that are in the rock and mineral kingdom. And if you're in New York, there's really great magical minerals. There's Herkimer diamonds. There's all kinds of cool things in that area. And if you join a rock and gem club or rock and mineral club, many of them have complete shops that allow you to cut these rocks on saws and make things with them. So this is
giant saws.
It's just an example. This is a rock we picked up here near Ashland last weekend, and the pink in it is the mineral feldspar. And this is the rough side of the rock. And then we took it to the Rock and Mineral Club, which has a saw, and I sawed one side. So then that's what it looks like when it's sawed. You get the colors come out, you can see the grain patterns more. And so what I do with these real quick, I just make bookends out of them. This one's a small one, but I'll just cut 2 sides, one side flat that way, one side flat in the bottom, and I have a nice bookend that has minerals in it for my book. You see, I have a few books in the background. Yeah.
Polished it looks like.
Right. So anyway, let us, without further ado, talk to Philos. Now, Samara
We're going to read the chapter.
Oh, that's right. We got to read the chapter. Sorry. So everybody, either online or on a paper copy of the oracles, open up to Genesis chapter 8.
No,
Chapter 8 to start with. I just want to go back a little bit for that, and I'll have it on. I'm going to keep it on the screen, so if you don't have it, then that's fine.
This is chapter 9.
Yeah, that's what I want. Okay, chapter 9, excuse me, chapter 9. Okay, we're going to start with chapter 9. I'm sorry. So chapter 9 in Genesis, the lands that time forgot. And this is a long chapter. We're not going to read it, but I do want to just summarize the very end of it. Okay, so this talks about the destruction, basically, the destruction of what people today call Atlantis. And it talks about the great library at the island of Guache, where the great library of knowledge resides. And at the very end of this chapter, what the Elohim have basically commanded the people who are remaining, who originally were Savasi, and then they left and they came back, and now they're being told that they have to leave the earth in mass, and there's not going to be allowed any of them to be left on the earth. And they are told that they need to seal the library up, and everybody come on the Ularian ship, the ark comes to pick them up. Some people don't want to come. They're going to say they're going to stay here, but the Elohim don't allow that. And I'm just going to read this very end here, starting at verse 131. Okay, so starting at verse 131, the momentous task of copying all the knowledge of the library had begun over 2 years earlier at the direction of Elohim the Father, who knew even then all that would come to pass, as he does even to this day and beyond. So too did he and the Council of 12 ensure that all the entrances to the great library and all of its branches were securely sealed in ways that would defy intrusion until the time Elohim called for the knowledge to come forth again upon earth. However, all the Sabasi did not willingly go up the ramp into the Eularian Ark. Some took elaborate actions to remain undetected until the ship had departed. But it was to no avail, as once together, to fulfill the word of Elohim, the Council of 12 joined in a circle of power and sent forth a spell of desire over all the islands of Guachi, and any Sabasi not yet aboard the Ark felt an overpowering urge to be there and raced to join the others already on board. Near midnight of the third day, the Eularian Ark ship silently rose into the starry sky as the Gerson remaining on the islands watched in awestruck wonder. The Gerson were the native people. The Sabasi crowded to viewing windows and portals as the Ark broke free of the atmosphere. They looked back upon the world that had been their home with much reflection and an outpouring of feelings. But as the earth quickly became just another indistinguishable star in the sky, they turned their thoughts in expectant contemplation and quiet conversations with one another to the new earth that would soon be their home, and considered all the adventures and wonders that might be before them. And most, at some point in the first hours before the Ark fell to their knees in most earnest prayer and gave thanks to Elohim for their blessings, so great they were beyond their expectations. Give you a preview of what Philos is going to talk about.
And it came to pass that after the departure of the Savasi from Earth, the primitive civilization among the tribes of Gerson scattered across the world remained almost unchanged for many millennia that followed.
The Sabasi that had departed traveled to the planet Herbanta in the star system of the Seven Sisters, as this was the nearest world to Earth from which they had come, where the inhabitants were their equals in culture, technology, and spiritual understanding.
There they lived and prospered for generations upon generations, but not without turmoil, both from within and without.
Within the star system of the Seven Sisters, on nearby planets and upon Herbonta, there dwelt a few communities of Olarians, the Savasi, the new settlers from Earth, Surtuas, another Alamar race civilization, and 3 other non-Alamar races. Other than the Savasi, all the others were at similar levels of technological advancement.
Amongst these groups, especially between the Alamars and the non-Alamars, there were often frictions and hostilities, but never destruction or warfare. But those accounts are best left for another tone.
And though the Eularians were friends with the Sabasi, they never shared with them the secrets of their great ships of space. And even after millennia, the Sabasi were unable to duplicate the technology of even short off-planet space travel.
After several generations had come and gone, many of the descendants of the Savasi fell away from faithfulness to the light of Elohim, and the history of the departure of their ancestors from Earth seemed to most Savasi to be only a myth.
After a time, the Olarians abandoned their communities and did not return, and this contributed to the vanishing of the stories of Earth from the memories of the Savasi.
But upon a fateful day, in the 88th year of the prophet Leolian, Elohim the mother came to Leolian in a dream and said unto him, "The earth is matured and its people have evolved. It is good soil, waiting for the planting of good seeds, that it might fulfill the fullness of its destiny.
You and your people are the seed bearers. It is given to you to do what your ancestors could not, to plant the seeds and cultivate the garden, and bring to pass the blossoming of earth and the people therein.
Gather unto you 1,200 men, women, and children that hold most true to the light, and return to the planet of your ancestors.
That the darkness will wane and the light will wax. Go to the 12 places upon the earth wherein dwells the largest number of people. Divide yourselves into 12 groups and let each settle among the people of one of these 12 places.
Bring nothing with you of the civilizations of Harbanta, save those of simple workings. Let each adult carry only the clothes on their back, the knowledge in their minds, their personal possessions, and 100 chevrons of gold with which to begin a new life."
Consider yourselves to be Celestine teachers, and the people of earth are your students. This is your sacred duty and calling from us.
We have given unto all the children of earth, born for the last 7 generations, our light within upon their souls. Because of this, they were born not entirely in the mold of their parents, and they are in our image and ready for the greater light that you can bring.
Teach them line upon line, by word and by example, of knowledge both temporal and spiritual, greater than they know, that they may become a people as great as has been promised to them from before their world began.
But seek not to transform them in a generation or even 2 or 3. Give them greater knowledge only as they are capable of holding it with greater responsibility and stewardship.
As I have spoken, so let it be.
And it came to pass that the prophet Leolian did as the mother directed, and gathered 1,200 of the brightest lights from among his people to return to earth, the long forgotten planet of their ancestors.
But in this task he had many challenges, for at first there were few, even among the most stalwart, who were willing to act upon his words and leave the comforts and security of all their homes and civilizations to journey to a more primitive world, so distant it could not be seen even with the most powerful stargazers.
It was only after much persuasion, prayer, and fasting that 312 families, comprising just over 1,200 individuals, agreed to make the journey to Earth and leave everyone and all they had known for all of their lives on Harbanta behind forever.
Once again, it fell to the Ularians in an ark ship to return the new settlers of Earth to the planet. But few Ularians still followed the ways of Elohim, and a ship and crew were only procured after payment of 300 chevrons of gold per passenger.
It is fortunate that the Divine Mother only directed the settlers to bring 100 chevrons of gold each, as that was all most had left after selling all of their property and most of their possessions to raise the fee demanded by the Ularians for passage to Earth.
Even after divesting themselves of all of their possessions, it was only after some of the wealthier settlers and some with less children paid the passage for those still lacking the fee, and some who were remaining on Harbonta contributed, that the entire 369,000 chevrons of gold was paid to the Olarians.
The trip to Earth took over 3 years, but finally the day arrived when the blue planet came into view, and few were those who were not awed as the ark approached ever closer.
There was much discussion before their arrival about how best to make their presence known and integrate into the native populations. And the ark circled the planet for 3 months after its arrival to give the settlers time to study the languages and customs of the various native groups to which they would be going amongst.
A varied approach to first contact, depending upon the inclination for violence or peace by the local people, was agreed upon.
The families were divided into 12 groups of approximately 100 each.
8 of the settler groups were coming among peaceful people, and they were quietly disembarked in secluded locations near local populations with the intention to first establish their own community and shortly thereafter make contact with the local people and integrate into their communities.
The 4 groups of settlers that landed near native groups likely to be hostile were settled atop high, easily defended pinnacles with the intention to fortify their positions and make gradual contact with the natives from their protected enclaves.
Thus were the descendants of the Savasi returned again to Earth in number, and through them and their descendants, over the course of varying times, sprang forth the 12 great ancient civilizations of Earth, before the coming of Elohim the Sun.
Okay, so that it gives a good prelude that answers a lot of questions right there that pertain to pyramids, Egypt. But we'll let Philos answer some more. I'm just going to take a quick little break, and I'll be right back, and then we can talk to Philos.
Yes.
I have a question. So when Brother Embrosewyn was doing this, getting this information, right? When you wrote this part, right? Was he there on the ark when they were talking about this?
He could go wherever he wanted. If he had an interest, he could go and look closer. It was kind of like if you have a virtual reality, you can
Yes.
move around and you can go close.
Yes.
That's
So we could say that he was actually on that ship when they're having this conversation, right?
right. Yeah. Cool.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool. He got to do some really cool stuff.
Wow. Okay. And he saw the Olarian, Savasi. He saw them, how they looked and everything like that, right?
Right.
The Olarians look like.
Yeah.
I remember we had some conversations way back when, and they look like us, just a mixture of Alamars. The original, didn't you say the original Alamars that came on the first ark ship looked very blonde hair, blue eyes, and tall?
Not all.
No, but that was kind of, they look more Scandinavian, you said. That was the first group, but
that's not what that's, I mean, basically, Ularians are like us. They're
mixture.
Yeah, they're a mixture of different types of people, different colors of skin, and that's a normal thing. But just like on Earth, you have populations to concentration. If you're in Africa, most people are the black race. If you're in Scandinavia, most people have blonde hair and blue eyes. So it just depends upon. Olarians are not any different, and I think it's really important when you're talking about any kind of other races, whether it's all Alamars or Ularians or anybody else, to realize that all Ularians are not space traveling. All Alamars aren't like us that aren't space traveling.
They are Alamars. They're just
right. But I mean,
Ular.
That was their original home world. Yeah. So, but I mean, whatever race or group of people you take, some are very primitive, some are very advanced. It depends on what planet they're on and when they started, so you can't just lump them all together and say, oh, this group is all a space traveling group and this one, and that's just not the way it is. It depends on where they are.
In the universe.
Okay, so a couple things to talk about before Philos talks about. The pyramids of Egypt are primarily constructed of limestone. And they know the quarries that these came from. I mean, they can see the quarries that the limestone was quarried. And the question was, how do they get these big blocks to where they are? And some of the largest blocks are granite. They're not limestone. And granite is heavier and harder than limestone. And some of these, they know where all this stuff was quarried. And the question was, well, how did it get from the quarry to there? And particularly the granite, which were some of the largest blocks to begin with, and it's a more dense stone than the limestone. So they're very, heavy stones, like 15 tons, some of them, big, heavy stones. And the quarry that they came from was 800 kilometers away from the pyramids. So how do they get this gigantic stone? They can see where they cut it out of the ground and formed it, but how did they get it from there 800 kilometers to where the pyramids are? Well, first of all, you have to remember two things. What the world we see today geographically, where the rivers are, where the oceans are, where the sea are, those things change in a very rapid period of time. When you're talking about the pyramids that were built thousands of years ago, when those pyramids were built, the Nile River ran right next to where, talking about the pyramids of Giza here, where the Great Pyramid is and everything. So that's the area I'm talking about. At that time, the Nile River ran right next to that spot. Today, the Nile River is like 9 miles away from there. 9 miles. That's how much has changed in the thousands of years. And so when they would get like these giant blocks of granite and get them on the ships,
How did they even do that?
that would use a little bit of Celestine magic there, and we'll talk. That's what we were showing you the water sparkling up with the sound. But I'll let Philos talk about that. But the main thing is once they got them on the ships, they were able to sail that 800 miles down the Nile River and bring the blocks basically right to the spot where they were building. So there was a little bit of special abilities involved there. I'll let Philos talk about that. But the main transportation was done by river on extremely substantial boats that could hold that big of a stone and not sink. So anyway, so without further ado, let's talk to Philos. So Samara, would you say a prayer about that?
Sure. Heavenly Father and Mother, we're so grateful for this opportunity to speak with Philos, to hear Philos's wisdom. And we're just so grateful for his willingness to speak with us, for Embrosewyn's ability to communicate in this way. And we ask that your love, your light be within us, around us, that what we speak about is totally in the light, and that we can take this knowledge and apply it to our knowledge base. We love you and appreciate you so much. In the name of our brother Yeshua, so be it.
So be it. Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Thank you for letting me to come today. I hope everyone can understand me when I speak. Can everyone understand me? If you can't, well, I'm sorry. Hopefully that's the case. All right, so you want to talk today about some very interesting things. They're interesting to me. I hope they are to you as well. So I know you have a lot of questions. So let's just begin with your questions, and you'll just read them for me and I'll see how I answer them.
Okay, number one. Who built them and why?
All right, so that's a good question. So as you know, there's a lot of, when it concerns the pyramids, particularly the main ones that all the tourists go to, that there's a lot of New Age speculations about what that's for, what they were built for, how they were built, why they were where they are, all of those things. And yes, there are some special techniques that were used in some cases. I'm going to talk about that. But I want to discount at the very beginning all of the things that have to do with anything other than what they were actually built for, because there was not an alternative purpose. It's easy to interpret an alternative purpose, but they were built for what they say they were built for today. They were the tombs of the pharaohs. That's a great monument to themselves. The Egyptians had a great belief in the afterlife. And that is why you see all these mummies and artifacts and everything that you can find, not just in the Great Pyramids, but also in all kinds of burial places. You have even fairly common people in Egypt, if they could afford in their life to be mummified, even if they just had a little burial spot, they'd put on their valuable objects that they wanted to take with them into the next life. And so you have to understand that period of time, from the times of the first pyramids to then, the culture of life after death, and being able to take with you physical things from this life into the next life, was a very great part of the life of every Egyptian, from the royal to the lowest one. Their whole culture revolved around this concept. So creating the pyramids, the pharaohs were like God to the people, to the average people. And so these great pyramids were built as their tombs. Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't have been used for other purposes that I'll talk about. But please understand that was their primary purpose, to be a tomb for the pharaoh. So someone, I think, asked a question about the Sphinx, and that was the same thing. The Sphinx was created as a guardian of, I mean, the one that they had other sphinxes in other parts of Egypt, but the Sphinx that's at the Great Pyramids of Giza area was created to guard the greatest pyramid there. So understanding that basic foundation, and the next part of the basic foundation is, how were the pyramids created? Well, first of all, you know, there's a lot of sand in that part of Egypt, and it was true for a long time. But where the pyramids were built is on a bedrock, meaning solid rock. This is like a table, but it's solid and good, goes down, of limestone. So that was what it was built of. And the primary building materials were limestone blocks that were quarried at nearby quarries, except for the granite blocks, which I think Embrosewyn just spoke about as being quarried from 800 kilometers away. But for the most part, that was localized quarries that weren't that far away. Now, why were the pyramids built? First of all, you have to imagine, if you were to go today as a tourist and see the Great Pyramids of Giza, you would be awestruck. They are so imposing, so magnificent. And that's for you as a modern person to go, who, for instance, I know some of you live in large cities or great skyscrapers that go up to the sky. So you're not unfamiliar with very tall buildings and great works. And yet, even with your familiarity with this type of modern engineering marvels, to go to see the pyramids, you feel very small. They feel very grand and very great. So if you can imagine how, if you feel that way as a modern person who is exposed to modern architecture and buildings, if you would feel that way today going to the pyramids, think about how people have felt through all the centuries and millennium before the modern era. When you see a building even above 1 floor tall was a very rare thing. And even into the 1800s, to see a building that was more than a few stories tall was a very rare thing. So to take those people and put them in this place where these amazingly large structures are was incomprehensible. Only the gods could have done something like this in people's minds. And so that whole concept carries forth even into the modern era, that something so grand could only have been done by some supernatural means of the gods, or as the modern people think of as aliens from other planets or whatever. And there are some similarities that we're going to talk about. But the basic function was to be a tomb. And the basic building blocks were limestone blocks that were quarried nearby, and a few of the granite blocks that were quarried from much further away. Now, why did they build a pyramid? Well, first of all, you read the chapter in the Oracles, chapter 10 of Genesis, where you understood how these people, who actually, they weren't aliens, their ancestors came from this planet. However, they actually technically were aliens as far as their knowledge, because they had lived for generations on far more advanced planets where they understood greater technological knowledge and engineering knowledge. And they were seeded. That was the name of that chapter, chapter 10, the seed bearers. And they were seeded on this planet back. They were returning to the planet of their ancestors with advanced engineering and science knowledge. And they were seated on the places on the planet that had the 12 greatest concentrations of people. Not necessarily civilizations, because it was very primitive at that time. But there were people there that were the basis for a civilization. And so this area of the Nile Delta of Egypt was one of those places that the seed bearers came. And they then became those people who had that advanced knowledge. Now, there are pyramids all over the world, different types of pyramids. And they're all from the same source. They're all of those engineering marvels that were created by, quote, primitive people were created possible because of the ones who returned to the earth with greater knowledge of engineering and science. Now, why a pyramid? Why not some other building? Well, again, from an engineering standpoint, a pyramid is a structure, whether it's hollow inside or solid like the pyramids here with just small chambers. In any case, you're going to be able to use the least amount of materials to make a strong structure that's going to last. So when you look at a pyramid, well, why is it not some other shape? It's that the primary purpose of why it's that shape. Yes, there is an energy related benefit, but that wasn't the reason they were built as pyramids. The reason they were built as pyramids is, first of all, think about the huge amount of rock that was created to make these pyramids. So there's no other shape they could have made that would have given it the strength it needs, and it's going to take the least amount of rocks that it's going to be necessary to do it. And so that's a very important point. So it gave it the structural strength and required the least amount of materials to give that and create that structure. And so that's why that they built it as a pyramid. Now, the fact is that pyramids also have an energy function as well. That wasn't why they built them as a pyramid, but that was a benefit of being a pyramid. But I don't want you to think the pyramid by itself is the only thing that has that kind of energy benefit. So you could think about like a pinball machine, and the pinball is bouncing around inside the pinball machine, and it's the same with a pyramid shape and other similar shapes, like a cone shape that has no walls. It's just smooth all around, but it comes to an apex at the point. So if there's energy that's released and it bounces off those walls, or it focuses in the case of a funnel, so if there's energy coming in from the top, it comes in, but it as soon as it comes into that space, it spreads out. And then when it spreads out, then it starts to bounce around. And what happens when it bounces around? You saw the video of the water that starts to bounce up and down. And so it gets more agitated, more amplified. And so that's the key word, amplified. So that shape of a pyramid or a cone, you see that all the pictures of the old sorcerers and sorcerers, and they wear a cone-shaped hat that later become what they call a dunce cap. Where they put, if you're a stupid person, you have to wear the dunce cap. Well, that's funny, because if they're wearing a dunce cap or that cone shape, it's going to make them smarter, because the energy is going to be amplified as it goes through that. And so that's the point to remember, is the word amplification. Again, it wasn't the purpose of the pyramids, but it was a benefit of the pyramids, that it creates an amplification. But it's inside the pyramid that the amplification is created. So in the case of the pyramids that were tombs, that were burial chambers for the pharaohs, well, their dead body got the benefit, but once the tombs were all sealed up, there's not a lot of benefit to anyone else, because all the energy is inside from that. So I think go from that now. So ask that question again and make sure I gave somewhat of an understandable answer to it. What was the question again? That
Who built them and why? And you also answered how they are built. And then,
well, no, how they are built, that's another part. All right, so
okay.
For the most part, the large blocks that were used to create the pyramids, they're quarried at the quarry. They're transported, some by the river, most by the river, and because the river would always run close to where the quarries were at that time. So the river may not run anywhere close to those quarries today, but in the times they were right there. The river was there, the Nile River. But the trick was, how do you get this big block onto the ship? So for that, they did use a little Celestine techniques. And that's why I asked Embrosewyn to show the video at the beginning of the water that comes up inside the bowl that vibrates. So sound is a power that can move physical objects. This is a Celestine technique that was learned, not, I should say it's a Celestine technique, it was a technique that was from the Ularians and from the Herbarthans that the Celestines learned. So we're going to call it a Celestine technique now, but it wasn't given by Elohim to them. It was given because they were exposed to these advanced cultures. So with the proper sound, in the proper volume, focused in the proper place, you can levitate great weights, not up into the sky, just a little bit. But that little bit is enough. So for instance, if you have a stone that weighs 10 tons, well, you can move that stone across the flat ground by putting a bunch of logs underneath it that are round, and they basically become wheels. And so then as people start to pull and push great numbers, it starts to roll along those logs, and the one in the back comes out and it goes put in the front, and it keeps going. And they're able to do that. But then when you talk about things that are going up an incline, like for instance, you're building a pyramid and you've already got, say, half of it built, but now you're building the top half. Well, they had to have incline ramps that they were going up to get the stone from down there up to a higher spot. And that, because of gravity, that would simply not work using logs and rolling and people pulling and pushing. There would not be sufficient people pulling and pushing that could do that. So that's where they did have to use the sound energy that was given to them, that was brought back by those Savasi who returned to Earth with the superior knowledge. And with that, they would still use the logs. They still use the logs, and they still use the incline ramp, and they still use people in pulling. But now instead of pulling 10 tons, trying to pull a 10-ton rock or even a 2-ton rock up this incline ramp, instead of doing that, they could use the sound energy to make it levitate a little bit. It doesn't even have to levitate all the way. If they could make a 10-ton rock, instead of weighing 10 tons, only weigh 1,000 pounds, now people can pull it up the incline ramp. And so it's not that it actually changed weight. It didn't change weight, but they did a sufficient levitation that's all the weight that was remaining on the logs that were being pulled, that I was pulling over. I'm not saying that right, but anyway, you understand what I'm talking about. And so that's how that was done. So using that sound energy, they're able to load these heavy blocks onto the boats. Using the sound energy, they're able to unload the rocks back onto land and onto the logs to roll it. Using the sound energy, whenever they have to go up a hill or up an incline ramp going up the pyramid, they can use the sound energy to lighten that rock enough so that the people can in fact pull it up. Now the only other place that besides the pyramids of Egypt that this was used a lot, there were other places that it was used, but the two primary places that it was used was here, but also in Nepal, when they built great monasteries there that were up on cliff faces, and that's how they got the big rocks up there. But unlike the pyramids, which used the inclined ramps, that the rocks were still pulled up and just lightened, the people in Nepal were able to be more advanced in using the sound energy, so they actually could get those rocks to be levitated completely off the ground, no weight left on the ground, basically weightless as far as the people are concerned. So they actually could push them very easily up to, because there's no longer weight. It's like pushing a feather almost. So that's how those great temples that were built up on the cliff, everyone's wondering, how did they do that? Well, that's how they did it. And so anyway, that's part. So go on to the next question, unless I didn't answer that one adequately. I'm not sure.
That's good. When were these built? I mean, we know that when they came back, but in our chronological time, when was that? How many thousands of years ago did they return to Earth?
So the first pyramids were, say, chronologically, our time would be about 6,500 years ago, were the first ones that were built. Now, the first ones are very primitive. So the ones that you see on the Giza Plateau, where that was the apex of the pyramid building culture of Egypt. But prior to that, they had what were called step pyramids, which are more like the ones in Mesopotamia area and in the American continents. The step pyramids did not have the finished smooth lines of the pyramids of Giza, which today they don't either because all those stones were taken away. But the original step pyramids were, you know, a step is laid, rocks, and then another, like a step goes up and another one is made, and another, it's a pyramid shape, but it has very distinct steps. Well, the pyramids at the Giza Plateau originally were created not like step pyramids, because the step pyramids have big giant steps that they go up like that. Whereas the course of the pyramids at Giza were the rocks were stuck but much closer together, not the big spaces like the old step pyramids. And because they're much closer together, one layer of rock upon another layer of rock upon another layer of rock, because of that, when they wanted to finish it, they used a finishing limestone and then a coating on that. So the end became a perfectly smooth surface. Now today, if you look at the pyramids, unfortunately, you don't see that except a little bit on the Kappa one, because all of those facing stones that made that nice smooth surface were removed years later by other cultures and civilizations to build their buildings. Oh, well, look, there's a whole big mountain of rock. Let's take some of those so we don't have to quarry them there, we'll just take them off the pyramid. And so that's what they did. All right, so next question.
Why were they all across the planet? We know that because of
yes, because of the returning Savasi. Again, if you're going to build a structure that's going to last, it's got to be built out of stone. It's got to be built on a stone bedrock foundation. And the least amount of stone you're going to need is if you build it in a pyramid shape, which is also an extremely strong structural shape. That's why those pyramids are still there, wherever they are in the world today, because they were built in a pyramid shape out of stone, and it's a very strong structure.
Okay, were they used for different purposes? I mean, in Egypt, they used them for tombs. Were they used for different things with that same technology from Harbanta, or the pyramids that were built in different parts of the world?
Most pyramids were used as tombs. Sometimes smaller pyramids were used for altars where they would have religious ceremonies at the top. Those would normally not have come to a pyramid shape. They would be cut off at the top. You see those in the Mesopotamia area of the Americas a lot, where instead of coming to an apex point, it comes up, but then it has a flat surface. It was on that flat surface that they would perform religious rituals, including, unfortunately, human sacrifice in some parts of the world. So, next part.
Okay, are there ships in any of them?
No, there are no ships inside them. That's not the alien connection is through the Savasi, not through other aliens coming and using the pyramids for anything like that.
Okay, are the pyramids currently used for teleportation?
No, that's not the purpose of the pyramids.
Okay, do they contain both positive and negative energy vortexes?
Yes, of course they do, very strongly. Now, again, that's not an intentional function of the pyramids. It's not something that they built, saying, oh, let's have a positive energy vortex here and a negative energy vortex here. Just like they are in nature, in natural forms, where you find a positive energy vortex or a negative energy vortex, those are normally formed not by intentional, well, we're going to form something right here, but just by the energy that's created naturally in that location opens up a positive and negative energy vortex. Now, what happens when you have that is because it's a vortex, there's two types of vortexes, and you don't want to make sure you don't confuse those two. There are vortexes that become portals that can be used to go to other worlds even. And then there are vortexes that are not portals, that are simply vortexes, positive or negative, based upon the energy that was naturally created at that spot. So even though the pyramids were unnatural structures, they weren't created naturally, they were created by people building them. But in that process, there are going to be positive and negative vortexes. So for instance, anywhere near or in a line with the apex of a pyramid is going to be a very powerful positive energy vortex. But other places that would have voids, where for instance, they would make a chamber as an example. Well, if that chamber happened to be directly beneath the apex of the pyramid, then it's going to be receiving that positive energy. So it would be a positive energy location and part of the same positive energy vortex. The pyramid themselves are gigantic positive energy vortexes. So but inside them, because of the way they construct the tunnels and the little chambers and things like that, you can have portions, even though it's inside a positive energy vortex, that are negative energy vortexes. Now, they're going to be completely overwhelmed by the gigantic positive energy vortex that is created by the pyramid shape. But if you were to go inside that pyramid and go into that little chamber, you would feel a negative energy, a negative feeling. It's confined to that little chamber, doesn't affect the larger positive energy vortex, but it would still be there if you were actually in that chamber.
What about dimensional doorways?
Well, that would be the particles. So yes, you can have particles. There are in the pyramids, there are particles that do go to other dimensions. So that is a possibility that you can have. But the problem for anybody there is that they're pretty useless particles as far as because they're inside the pyramids, and so the people can't go into the pyramid. I mean, tourists do today. But if you think about all of the years, thousands of years before today, the pyramids were sealed up. So any particle that's in there is useless to anybody that comes from the other side that can't get out of the pyramid, and it's useless to anybody on this side that can't get into the pyramid. So they're not beneficial particles, but they were naturally created. Now, there are two types of particles. There are those that are created naturally, and that's a resonance type of thing. So for instance, if you have a particle that develops here in a positive energy vortex, and the resonance of that particle is the same as some in another the location in another dimension or another place even on your planet, then it's going to develop a resonance that's naturally going to open this conduit between them. So that's a naturally created one. Those are actually more rare. Most particles are actually created at some point by Celestines who wanted to create a particle there, or by Elohim themselves to create a particle there.
Well, there's a belief system in the New Age world that people can open these portals, or that these portals in tombs or in pyramids open for special people.
Well, that's not accurate as far as just because you're a person. Even if you are a Celestine light apostle, if you go stand in front of a portal that's closed, it's not going to open for you. There are ways that you can open it. There are special Celestine techniques, but they are not known. They're only revealed in person by oral instruction. And so there's no way that anyone who's not a Celestine that's been given that oral instruction, and I can tell you there's none that are on that world outside of your group that have had that instruction, can understand how to do that. And even if they did, they wouldn't have the Celestine priesthood authority to do it. So for particles, Elohim is very protective of particles. And because particles can be dangerous, because they can be dangerous to someone going in, something coming out. And so even though those things happen naturally, a portal can naturally open up and someone from this planet can go through and be lost and never come back, and things from the other worlds can come through when those portals are open naturally. So the ability to open them unnaturally, to open them that's outside of their normal cycle of opening and closing, that's only given to Celestine priesthood holders of a high order that have received that understanding and instruction in person. It can't be given any other way. And there's more to it. I think there's some in the articles that talks about a little bit about how they opened portals in Yeshua's day, when he took the apostles to different places. But to actually open a portal requires certain words that must be said, and all this that are, you don't know those words, and if you know the Celestine, you don't know what those words are. And there are certain motions that must be done as well to open a portal outside of its normal cycle.
Okay. Are they connected? Are they built on some kind of grid? It's another belief.
No, they are not connected. And that's kind of a subtopic that there's a great New Age belief about energy grid around the planet, and it's rolled all over the place, and this place is connected to that place, that connected to that place, and that's a subject I should talk about a little bit, because that's a common belief in the New Age world, and it's totally without foundation, and I want to explain why that is. First of all, the planet itself is constantly changing and evolving. You do not have a dead planet. If you had a dead planet, and there's a lot of dead planets that are basically, they have no volcanic activity, they have no magnetic field, they have no molten or semi-molten material inside them. They're basically just a piece of frozen rock in space. And if you had a piece of frozen rock in space, you could set up some type of energy grid upon that, because nothing's ever going to change in that frozen rock in space. It's always going to be a frozen rock in space. So because nothing's changing on it, you could set up an energy type of grid and say, well, this point's going to have an energy plane, this point we're going to connect to all those, they're going to relate to each other. You could do that, but you cannot do it on a planet like your dynamic Earth, which is an extremely dynamic planet. You have earthquakes, you have volcanoes. Why do you have those things? Because the Earth inside is constantly alive and moving. You have a magnetic field that is also changes. Even in your lifetime, the magnetic field of your planet has changed. And actually, if you look, you have two types of poles on your planet. You have the magnetic pole and you have the geographic pole. So if you look at the geographic pole and say, well, here geographically, this is the North Pole and the South Pole, that's great. But the magnetic poles, which is where your compass points to, and you have a compass that points to magnetic north, that's not the same as the geographic pole. The actual place they've said geographically is the North Pole and the South Pole. And the magnetic pole moves. It doesn't stay in the same spot. And so, depending upon where you are in the world, your compass is going to have to be adjusted a certain number of degrees to be pointing to magnetic north. And so, for navigational purposes, like for instance, if you fly an airplane around, they have navigational maps for pilots, and that navigational maps have to be updated occasionally, because what happens is the magnetic north, which all of those things depend upon for navigation, it moves. It changes to a different location, and it actually travels. I'm talking not a little move, I'm talking about hundreds of miles, 1,000 miles. It moves over time. And so even in your modern world, the maps that they use for navigation in the air have to be updated periodically to show the new location of the magnetic north. It goes not the same as in the old map location. And so for navigation purposes, they have to make adjustments. And so because you have this moving Earth with all these powerful systems like your magnetic fields, the magnetic fields that your planet has, like a gigantic magnet, and it's based upon these magnetic poles that move, things that are moving, and that movement inside is creating immense types of energy that make volcanoes and earthquakes and powerful lightning storms when those things occur. And so the energy of your Earth is constantly moving around. So there's no possible way, no conceivable way that there could ever be a static energy grid that's the same points all over the world, because the energy is always changing and moving. It's not staying. Another perfect example of that, and I'm sorry if I start to get talking too much, let me know, because I tend to go off on talking a lot. But a perfect example is the Hawaiian Islands. If you ever look at a map of the Hawaiian Islands, you see they're in a line. It's not a straight line like you draw on a ruler, but you can start in the far northwest area, and you'll see this kind of slow arcing curve of one island after another island after another island, but following this arcing curve until you get to the last island, which is the current big island of Hawaii. Well, what happens is that there is what they call a hot spot, and that this is a weakness in the mantle of the Earth at that location. It's very thin. It's underwater, down in the ocean, but the solid crust of the earth at that point is very thin. So even though inside the earth it's molten earth moving around and everything is moving around, but because this hard spot up above is very thin, it's very easy for this magma, even though the magma that's there today might have been the magma that was on the other side of the world last year, and it's moved over here. But when it gets big enough, it pushes through that hot spot, and the hot spot stays in the same spot because right there is it's thin. But so it comes up, it erupts up, and it makes an island. But the thing is that the whole surface of the earth is constantly moving. You can see, if you look on a map, you can see how the western coast of Africa kind of fits kind of nicely into the eastern coast of South America, because that once was together. But right down the middle of the ocean, of the Atlantic Ocean, both the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic, all the way from pole to pole practically, is what they call the Mid-Atlantic Rift. And I know I was talking about Hawaii, but now I'm talking about the Mid-Atlantic Rift. The Mid-Atlantic Rift is a place where molten lava from the inside of the earth is constantly coming up, but it doesn't come up like a volcano that erupts out of one spot. It comes up all along this crack in the earth, the Mid-Atlantic Rift. And as it comes up, it splits apart, and half goes this way and half goes that way. And it's basically creating new earth. New earth is coming up and solidifying and going one direction this way, one direction that way. And at some point, Africa and South America were once joined together. But that Mid-Atlantic Rift came right down, and over the millennia and millions of years, it's pushed them further and further apart, because they're like floating on top. Even though they're solid rock, they're floating on the molten or semi-molten rock underneath them. And a new rock comes up, they get pushed apart. What happens to the old rock? If they're getting pushed apart, well, the old rock gets what they call subsiding, and it goes underneath. So for instance, if you take the west coast of North America and Central America and South America, that whole line there, guess what you see? There's all kinds of volcanoes all along that entire coastline. If you start all the way up to the north part and go all the way down through Washington State and Oregon and California, in Mexico, down through Central America, into South America, and you go along the coastal countries there, Chile and the other coastal countries, they all have these volcanoes that are very active and very, very erupting. Well, why is that? Why are those volcanoes all right along this line? And it actually continues across the other side. They call it the Ring of Fire over to the Pacific side. But let's just look at that western side, because here you have another plate that's moving, new materials coming up, and the old material gets pushed until it reaches that other plate, North American plate in this case, or South American, and it gets subsidized underneath it. So the plate's growing, but it has to go somewhere, so it goes down like that. And as it goes down, guess what happens to it? It starts to melt as it gets in the deeper part of the earth. So now it's melting, and what happens with that erupting additional material that's being added? Well, there's new material coming in. Well, the old material was already crowded, so the new material coming in is melting, and it has to go somewhere. So it erupts as volcanoes all along that line. That's where one plate is going underneath another plate on the surface. And earthquakes happen because the two plates collided like that, and they make a friction. This one wants to go down, this one is still here, and at some point it breaks like that, and that makes an earthquake. And so all of these things are just, I'm talking too long on this subject. That's all about the dynamic earth. The earth is dynamic. So you can't have a grid pattern that's all in the same spot, because the earth itself is constantly moving underneath and inside, disrupting those energy patterns. Now, there are exceptions to locations. So there are very powerful spots, for instance, the Giza Pyramid location, many other spots in the world that do not move, that are in fact very powerful spots, but they are not connected in a grid pattern. It's not like someone said, all right, well, I'm going to build a pyramid in Egypt, and then I'm going to build Stonehenge over here, and then I'm going to put the Grand Canyon over here and make all of these spots be connected in a geometric grid
Geometric.
geometric grid. Thank you very much. And there are spots, very powerful spots. You should know about those spots. You should visit those spots because they'll be very helpful for you. But it's not a grid pattern. And I'm sorry I talked so long on that. So
That's okay.
Oh, you can never talk to my Philos.
There's another belief that the pyramids are connected to the idea of ascension.
no, the whole concept of ascension is a very new age erroneous concept. So anything that's connected to this concept of ascension, yeah, and then different new age people believe different things about what that is. So if you ask one new age person what's ascension, they may say, well, that's just going to a higher state of consciousness. You ask another person what's ascension, they say, well, that's coming to a higher state of physical being. Their physical being is changing to not a physical body anymore. So there's different beliefs about what ascension is in that new age concept, but there's nothing in the pyramids that's related to any of those things. And the whole concept that they have of ascension is pretty erroneous. Yes, there is ascension. You do grow, you expand your soul energy. But here's where a great difference between truth and falsehood exists. In the false teachings, both in New Age things and some other religions as well, they think that you personally don't have to do anything. You just have to say the magic words or confess to the priest to be forgiven, or go to the pyramids and your DNA will be changed magically by being there, and then you will automatically be assigned to a higher being. That's not how you become a higher being. And it's not even possible to do it that way because there's no growth there. You didn't grow, you didn't work, you didn't labor, you didn't fail, you didn't suffer, you didn't gain by experience to get any growth, to get any expansion. You can't just go and I'm going to the pyramid now. So now I'm a higher consciousness being. I'm going to the pyramids, or I'm going to this other spot. And so now I'm spiritually enlightened. You get spiritually enlightened by learning, by experience, by knowledge, not by just being a place or saying a word. And so that whole concept is very erroneous.
Okay. Is there something else in them that people still haven't figured out?
Not that's important.
Okay. What were they used for then, and what are they used for today? Well, I think we've talked about that other than tourism.
Yeah, I think you pretty much called that already.
Why the exact positions and dimensions?
That goes back again to engineering. If you are a pharaoh and you want to be remembered for all time, you want to build a little pyramid or a big pyramid. So when you look at, again, this is more practical than it would be attributed to. If you're a pharaoh, you want to build the biggest pyramid possible because that makes you the biggest pharaoh that ever existed. But you are constrained. You only have so many people available to help build your pyramid. You only have so much money available to pay those people to build it because they weren't slaves. They were paid. I mean, there were slaves involved too, but that's not the majority. The majority are just normal people who worked on the pyramid in the day. And either many of them lived there while they were working on the pyramid. Some of them, if they lived close by, went home. A lot of them lived right on the site, and they would work in shifts. So you would have a shift that this is your time to come work, and you have to be there for a month, or 2 months, or 3 months, and you would live on the site. And the other months you'd go home and take care of your family and your crops and whatever your normal business was. But what was the question again? I'm awful on tangent.
Well, the exact positions.
All right, so yeah, the positions and dimensions, again, this is an engineering thing. First of all, if you're a pharaoh, you want to have the biggest possible pyramid. You want, of course, to be able to see it, so you wanted to build it where you are, or close to where you are, so you can watch it being built and oversee it. But other than that, it's engineering. So the very first thing, before you build anything that's going to last, you have to make sure that it's built on a foundation that's not going to go anywhere. So pyramids in Egypt were built in different locations. In fact, a lot of the pyramids that were built by the Egyptians back in the ancient days are now in the country of Sudan. They're not even in Egypt anymore. They're in another country. But the ones at Giza that you're talking about there, the Giza Plateau, that's a very limestone, solid bedrock limestone area. So rather than building on sand, which wouldn't last, those pyramids are built upon the limestone bedrock. So that's the first thing. You have to have a good foundation of where your pyramid is being built. And then you want to build it as large as possible. And then as possible, then the other thing is that from an engineering standpoint, you want to also, you'll find, and this is even true today, not so much true in modern world, but even if you go back 100 years, when people would build a house, as an example, even 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or they would orient their house by the compass. So they would have north always was facing north and south. They never just put a house there, well, this is one, going to plop the house, and they without thinking about how it aligned geographically. So they would always align, that people would align, even if they're building a little shack, they would tend to align it along the compass so that it had a nice north, south, east, west alignment. And that became a part of it. So as far as where they would put the pyramids, they put them where first of all, it was near where the pharaoh could see it and visit it. And number two, that it was on a firm foundation. And number three, that it was oriented correctly according to the magnetic north, east, and south compass directions. And then lastly, by the stars. Again, in the modern world, you never look at the sky. And if you live in a place like a city, you can't even see the sky because there's too many lights from the city. And so you look up in the sky, you don't see the stars and the planets. But until the modern era, that was not the case. Until the modern era, if you went out at night, it was night. There was no artificial light around. And so the sky became a jeweled place. And up until the modern time, until those artificial lights were everywhere, all people understood the sky. Didn't matter whether you were a poor person, a priest, a pharaoh. You learned the sky, you learned the constellations, you learned the stars, you learned the movement of the planets, you learned how to navigate by night by the stars. These were things that everybody understood because that was their life. They didn't have television, they didn't have computers, they didn't have video games. When it got dark, it was dark. And they'd go out and they'd see this amazing jeweled heaven above them. And they learned about it. They learned and they named the different constellations and the different places. And different peoples would have an affinity for certain areas, not because they came from there or not because a million years ago the spaceship came from that spot, but because that's where they had a resonance in their heart. And especially when you're talking about constellations, there's certain constellations that even to modern people who don't understand constellations, it's pretty clear. You can look at the constellation of Orion as an example, and it's very, if you ever see a picture, well, this is what it represents, oh yeah, I see that. That's very easy to connect those dots and see that picture of the hunter with Orion. And the three belt, the stars that go across the belt, that's very clear. People can see it. And so different people, including the ancient Egyptians, had affinities for certain constellations. Those were very important to them in their everyday life. That's what they connected to, and they would make all types of mythologies about that why that was important. And so it was not uncommon at all in any buildings of significance to align them with not just the compass directions, but also certain stars or constellations that were important to them.
Yeah, in fact, I've watched some digs or Discovery Channel where they've seen how the buildings were moved to keep aligning with a certain star system. So you just explained that. What about the math behind them, the sacred geometry that's attributed to pyramids?
Again, this is it's both an engineering thing. Engineering is math. If you want to know how big of a beam you need to have. You need to know what the weight's going to be above it, what the foundation is below it, and then you can use math to calculate exactly the size beam you need to go in that spot as an example. But also there is, when you look at, for instance, sacred geometry, there, in many cases, it doesn't relate directly to something, but in some cases it does. And this goes back to the sound resonance. If you look at the sound resonance, I think I'm going to ask Embrosewyn to talk about that more than myself, but the sound resonance has very mathematical resonant points. So today, when you have, if you take sound, it's measured in hertz. That's the way they measure sound frequency. So the frequency is, sound waves are mountain, valley, mountain, valley. So it makes a wave pattern. And those wave patterns, whether they're are big between them or very fast like this, is still a wave pattern. And that's a frequency. How frequent does that mountain occur? Is it here and here, or is it many times in between? That's frequency. That's what that word means. It's how frequent between the mountains and the valleys. And so those are very mathematically measured, and you can measure them very, very exactly with hertz. Now, in fact, if you have one of your new smartphones, you can download free apps that will measure frequency in hertz. And so you can go up to anything, like for instance, if you have a singing bowl and you clink the singing bowl, you can put your little smartphone next to it with that app open, and it'll show you exactly what the hertz frequency is. And there are certain hertz frequencies that resonate very strongly in different parts of the human body, and there's very mathematical number to those. And if you were to put those mathematical numbers out, there's about 9 that are the very key ones, and they make a very exact sacred geometry type pattern. And there's certain ones that are extremely powerful and useful. And one of them, I'll tell you, in case you ever want to buy anything that produces that frequency, is the 528 hertz. So if you wanted to buy a tuning fork or a singing bowl or anything that can produce that sound in a resonant way, that's a very good one to get. If you're only going to get one, that's a very good one, the 528 resonance. And but I won't talk more about that. So that's
Okay. Is there anything underneath the pyramids? And so what?
bedrock limestone.
Okay.
I mean, there's also, there's little tunnels they cut there and different chambers they haven't found, but it's not relevant to anything. They weren't made for any special purpose other than helping to build the pyramids or helping to get things inside the pyramids. So don't get caught up in that type of thing.
Is there water inside?
No, actually, that's not. If there were water inside, then the mummies wouldn't exist anymore. First of all, it's always been a fairly dry climate. It's in the time since the pyramids. Before that, it actually was quite a wet climate. But it has been a desert area for a long time. But it does rain, and then there's periods of time where it rains a lot. But the pyramids are very, very sealed. They're very tight inside. There's not moisture inside. You would not have the type of preservation of the mummies and preservation of the artifacts, particularly those made of wood, if there was a lot of moisture inside, or even a little bit of moisture. It's basically very, very dry. There's not places where it rains outside and it somehow leaks through the pyramid stones and inside the pyramid and makes water. There's not rivers running underneath it or anything like that. So they're very, very dry inside.
Okay, and you answered what the foundation is. And so I've heard they are energy centers. If that is so, did they stop being that way, and when and why?
As I said before, their primary purpose was to be a tomb, but because it created a pyramid shape, it also does make it an energy center, a very powerful energy vortex. When you're looking at energy vortexes, if you go out in nature, for instance, and you go to a waterfall, you're probably going to find a positive energy vortex, even if it's a small waterfall. But the dimensions of that vortex, how far away from the center that you can still feel the positive energy, is not going to be that very far. If you found one that you could feel the powerful energy, even a quarter of a kilometer away, that would be pretty far. So when you see the pyramids, they create a great energy that goes easily half a kilometer away from the perimeter of the pyramid itself. So they are powerful in that regard. And there are natural places that are that powerful as well. So for instance, in Oregon here, you have a place on the coast, Kawanda, that is extremely powerful, and it's like a pyramid as far as the power of it, the power. In fact, even greater than the pyramids in some cases. And I would recommend, if you would consider on your bucket list of places that you want to go in your lifetime and experience, and you thought about the Great Pyramid of Giza being one of those places, I would recommend that. That's a very good spot to do. But a place of comparable power that is totally natural is Kawanda here on the Oregon coast. That's equally as powerful as the pyramid. Not as grand, it's not as large, but it is as powerful. Energetic. Yeah. In fact, it's even more powerful because of the solar eclipse that happened there in 2017.
Yeah, okay. Does anybody live inside? I know there's a belief that they're connected to a civilization inside the earth.
No, there is nobody living inside, and there are no civilizations inside the earth. I know that's another great New Age belief. Locally here where they live, down the Mount Shasta, there's a very strong belief that there's a whole world that exists underneath Mount Shasta, whole civilization. And this has always been curious to me that people have this kind of belief, because would you want to live in a place that you never saw daylight, that you never saw the sun, that you never got to breathe fresh air outside? Who would want to live in a place like that? I don't know. But in any case, as I explained before, the earth is a very active place. There's no underground civilizations that are magnificent. I know there's a lot of science fiction books that have been written like that about those topics, and those carried away a lot of New Age beliefs, but there's nobody living underneath the pyramids. There's nobody living underneath Mount Shasta. So no.
Okay, I just wanted to add that Embrosewyn and I were talking the other day about there have been civilizations that built their cities underground for protection, but they still came up out to grow their crops and to have sunlight, which is important to be healthy here. And so I just wanted to add that. Have any Celestines ever built a pyramid by demolecularization, turning the stone into liquid, and then teleport them by telekinesis, moving the fluid to the exact place and solidify it to build pyramids for Pharaoh in Egypt so he can?
All right, that's a good question. All right, so part of that is yes, and part of it is no. All right, so the part that is yes, and this actually did include parts of the Great Pyramids and other pyramids in the world as well. There is a technique that is possible to take lime. Again, the primary stone that's used with the pyramids is limestone. And that exact stone, if you look at the chemical composition of it, you can actually create limestone. And in fact, I'm not sure what the link would be, but I know that there is a video on the internet that you can go to, some French gentleman who actually showed the technique how you can turn liquid limestone into solid limestone. And this very technique, just like it shows, was used in certain pyramids, not in a grand way. It's not like they made the pyramids that way, but they may have wanted to have certain stones in certain places that were just inaccessible the normal way. And so they did have the technology that was given to them by the Savasi that allowed them to understand how to create liquid limestone that then would solidify into solid limestone. And someone looking at it today would say, well, that's a solid block of limestone that was cut out of a quarry somewhere. But no, unless you see the cut marks, the chisel marks on it that show it was quarried, it was put in place there. And there's what happens is sometimes that you might see little chisel marks here and there where they kind of farmed it. But if it's not covered with those type of marks that show that it was chiseled out of the quarry, and it's very smooth, and it wasn't smooth by somebody rubbing it to make it smooth, then that would be one that was powdered. But what was the latter part of that question? Oh, transported. So no, they didn't transport it by liquid like that. They would actually make it in places like laying cement. So you have a little cement mixer there, you mix it up right on the spot where you're going to use it, you powder it out, it's right there. So they would do that in place. They'd bring the dry ingredients up to make the liquid. They make the liquid, they powder it into the form that the mold that they want to make it in, or they just do that right in place like that. And that same technique can be used for, it's very easy to do that with limestone. It's more difficult to do that with other stones like granite, but it is possible to do it with granite. And you're also going to see I'm sure you can find videos on the internet about some of the structures in the Americas, and this from the Central American places, where South American places, where the stones are, the gigantic stones are so perfectly matched that you can't even put a piece of paper in between them. And those were stones that were actually liquid and were added and solidified as stone. So to the appearance, it looks like they're quarried stones, but in fact, they weren't quarried stones in that way. The materials might have been quarried, but the stones were put in place by making a farm and actually using the adjacent stones next to it to be the farm outside perimeters, so that you pour the new stuff in and it forms right against those other stones at a different time. So it looks like it's a different stone because it was put there at a different time, but in fact, it was poured in.
Very interesting. Are the pyramids in Egypt exactly positioned or aligned with the Orion constellation?
Well, again, that's if that's the case, is not necessarily for any purpose other than, oh, I like the Orion constellation, so let's build one here, let's build one there. But remember, these pyramids were built at different times by different pharaohs over periods of time. So it wouldn't be some great master plan. Oh, let's build the pyramids to look like the Orion constellation, which is a very intricate constellation, very large too. So the answer is no to that question. I mean, not that it couldn't have a resemblance, not that it couldn't. People would say today, "Oh, look, it was built like the Orion constellation." Well, that wasn't the intention of it.
Okay. What about the pyramidal shape? We talked about crystals shaped in a pyramid, but can we make pyramidal construction from copper and stand above or under it?
Okay, so yes, you can actually buy those type of things, and you can make your own, where you take copper piping as example, and you can make a big enough pyramid, like say a pyramid that's 5 feet in diameter, 6 feet in diameter at the base, and go up, and then you have a place to sit inside. There is an energy to a pyramid's shape. There's not a lot of energy to one that's made of copper tubing, because it's only copper tubing on these little teeny spots. It still makes a pyramid shape. It still has some energy, magnification, and amplification, not as much as if it was a solid wall pyramid. Now, I mean, you could be inside it still, but if you had solid walls of copper, not just little pipes along the ridges areas, then you'd have something that was quite powerful actually to sit inside. But if you have just copper piping that's making that perimeter, yes, there is some benefit to it, but not as great as it would be by any means if they were actually walls of copper platings that were going around it, or any other good substance like that. But copper is a good one because it's one you can actually obtain, and there's some energy that flows very easily through copper, so that's a good thing. Now, interesting thing about pyramid shape is that even the pyramid shape, even if it's just done with the outline along the ridge lines there and the base, even that has an energetic effect. So for instance, and you can do this experiment at home, go buy a lettuce, a head of lettuce, and cut it right down the middle and put it in 2 bowls that are identical bowls, 1/2 in one bowl and 1/2 in another bowl. And then take a pyramid that you've made that is made out of your little copper piping, it's not tall, it's just maybe a foot tall, a foot and a half tall, half a meter at the most, but just big enough to cover that head of lettuce is all it needs to be. So take one of your bowls with half your lettuce and put it underneath the pyramid in the bowl. It's open to the air, just has the little copper tubing that's making the outline. And then take your other bowl, that's the exact same head of lettuce and exactly the same bowl, and just put it right beside the pyramid, off to the side, and leave them out and take pictures every day of what they look like. And don't just cut the lettuce in half, cut it in half and then open it up so that all the leaves are opened up and it's just like a salad in the bowl. And watch what happens, and you'll see that the ones that are under the pyramid will stay fresher and crisper longer over the days that ensue versus the ones off to the side, and they'll start to wilt and decompose more rapidly than the one that's under the pyramid. So that's a very easy experiment you could do to see the energy of the pyramid shape. And again, it doesn't have to be a pyramid, it's the cone shape. So you could do the same experiment making just a cone with smooth walls and no pyramid shape, and it would have the same effect, because it's that cone shape that where you're starting small and going big, that's amplifying the energy there.
Wouldn't it be even greater in a cone because it's not getting stuck in the corners?
It can and actually should be greater than a cone, yes.
And I've read over the years about pyramids, how you have to have a particular dimensions that relate to the Giza pyramid, I think. For dimensions for the base and for the top. And is that necessary?
It's not.
Okay.
Any of those shapes are going to bring that energy in. Now, the pyramid shape of the Giza pyramid, again, there are different shapes for different pyramids. If you look at Egyptian pyramids and you go back through history, they're not all those mathematical dimensions that we see the Great Pyramid of Giza or the other ones around it. There are some others that are much steeper than that. But again, from an engineering and architectural standpoint, that was the primary consideration, is what is the way that's going to be able to build this structure that's going to be the strongest and last the longest and use the least amount of materials, but still be the strongest and last the longest. And that's the mathematical shape that they've decided upon as being the best, which is why earlier pyramids might have been more steep, later pyramids went out to that later shape that you see today. So the effect of the energy is going to be more wide, with a wider pyramid and a less slope, and more focused and concentrated with one with less or steeper walls.
Okay, well, as we started with the chapter 10, and in there it's mentioned 4 areas that contain potential hostility. Where were those particular areas?
I leave that for Miriam to talk about.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any other pyramid questions that haven't been answered that popped into your mind during the course of the...
Oh, I talked a lot. I hope there's no any questions left. I'll certainly answer them if there is.
Hello, Philos. It's Danja. Just wanting to say how much I love you, how much we all love you, and we are so grateful and thankful for everything you are doing for us through Embrosewyn. Just thank you. You answered all my questions. Thank you so much. Me and Alex just sending our love to you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You're very sweet to say that. I am very humbled and grateful to have the opportunity to talk to all of you. I want to commend all of you. You're a very small group here, but you are open to the light. And as you are open to the light, it's going to open your lives even more and more, your future, your potential, all of these things. And I am honored to be able to take some time and share with you and hopefully help you on your journeys a little.
Thank you so much. Maybe one day I'll have my own Philos to talk through me.
Well, I have many friends, that's for sure. All right, so I'm going to say go in your lights with love and joy. It's been an honor and a pleasure to spend time with you.